Thank you, and good morning. Many thanks to Terry, to Dr. Pachauri, to our moderator for the invitation to this conference. It's a very important conference for us. I am assuming that some of you do not know much about the Inter-American Development Bank, so I'll spend just a few seconds to tell you why we are so vested in this topic. In 2010, the Board of Directors of the Inter-American Development Bank decided that by 2015, 25% of all our financial resources would be dedicated to climate change, biodiversity, and desertification. We are well on the way to achieve that goal. We are the largest source of multilateral finance to Latin America, and this will represent by 2015 about $3 billion dedicated to these issues. Now, let me, for the rest of the few minutes that I have, tell you a few points about how we see the climate change situation in Latin America, in particular with the fast-growing economy in the region, and what are the options and our positioning within those options. The first point that I'd like to make is that the physical impacts of climate change are already being experienced in Latin America at very high speed. We are likely to see the collapse of the coral biome in the Caribbean by mid-century. We are certain that there will be no glaciers left under 5,000 meters in the tropical Andes. We have strong evidence that Amazon dieback is a process that is already taking place. We know that sea level rise is already affecting critical infrastructure and coastal ecosystems throughout the region. We know that health costs in the Andes are increasing as a consequence of the migration of tropical vector diseases from tropical areas toward the Piedmont. All these things are being experienced today. We've made an analysis of what are the financial implications of these physical consequences of climate. We've concluded that about $100 billion in losses and damages are being incurred gradually, increasing gradually up to 2050, $100 billion per year, represent the value of losses and damages associated to these impacts. And not all of them, only those that we could quantify. Some of the impacts, for instance, on natural capital and biodiversity are very difficult to assess, and they will be beyond this $100 billion estimate that we've made. The relatively good news is that we also have concluded that investing early in adaptation is a very cost-effective, from a financial point of view, measure. And we are committed to be the adaptation bank in Latin America. We have estimated that we'll need to deploy about $17 to $27 billion per year to address some of the physical consequences of climate change by 2050. And this commitment of resources in adaptation, even though it's large, will enable us to address some of the physical consequences and the economic consequences of physical impacts gradually up to 2050. But even if we invest in adaptation, and we strongly believe in ecosystem-based adaptation as the first line of defense, even if we do that, there will be significant irreversible changes and avoidable changes on natural capital, on ecosystems that will not be able to reverse. The next point that I'd like to share with you is that Latin America, during the last 10 years, has decreased its carbon footprint by 11%. And this is at the same time that Brazil has lifted about 40 million people out of poverty. At the same time that Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Mexico are growing very fast compared to the global average. So while this economic progress is taking place, something simultaneously is also taking place, and that is a more efficient use of natural resources. Is that enough? No. But this is a big step, it's the first step toward these sustainable development goals, an 11% reduction in the carbon footprint of the region. Now, in order to get to 2 tons per capita, which, as you know, is the goal that is compatible with global stabilization efforts in climate, will require to reduce by 80% the carbon footprint of Latin America by 2050. As a business, under a business as usual scenario, the carbon footprint of the region will be about 10 tons per capita by 2050. If we are going to reach 2 tons per capita, we'll need to make significant increases and significant changes in behavior in the region. And I will summarize, because we don't have a lot of time, but I can, whoever is interested can give you much more details. I'll summarize the strategy that we see. That strategy is called the 3 zeros. We would like to support efforts in Latin America to achieve zero net deforestation by 2050. That's a significant step, it's a required step, because most of the carbon footprint in Latin America, in about 47%, is associated to land use change. The second zero is zero carbon generation, zero carbon power generation. Latin America has a relatively green power structure, but there are significant trends and significant drivers to carbonize that power structure as energy demand is increasing. We would like to support efforts to achieve zero carbon power generation by 2050. And that will require a very large deployment of renewable energy in the region, and we think it's feasible. There is a significant endowment of renewable energy, biomass, marine energy, geothermal, wind, and solar in the region that could be tapped. And the third zero is zero carbon transport systems. The transport sector is the sector that is growing at the fastest trend in terms of carbon emissions in the region. This is the result of the urbanization process, the motorization, and the increases in quality of life. Because we have the potential to move the power sector toward a zero carbon structure, we believe that we should invest a lot of efforts in also moving the transport sector to zero carbon, and the technologies exist today. So on adaptation, we need to invest very strongly on adaptation of the water sector, adaptation in coastal zones, adaptation in agriculture, which are probably the areas that will cause the most damage to the economies of the region, and in mitigation, focused approach to achieve this 3-0 strategy. Thank you.